health challenges for them as well. They're not a young team. Let me show you a photo of them. Okay, this is Congo, where they are. The arrow is just about pointing to where they live. They live even a little bit further north than that. Here they are. This is when I was working with them last year. So Pario is the one in the centre with the check shirt, and he's in his 70s. He is the most amazingly energetic man. But in Congo, most people don't live to 70. I mean, I think the average life expectancy is around 50. And he has had high blood pressure in the past. We was praying for protection over his health, because he's really the driving force behind the work. And it's become his life's goal, really, to see the New Testament published. And then Ali Madri is the one on his right with glasses on the left of the picture. He also has a lot of health issues. So one thing we can really pray for them is God's protection over their health. And people will testify often, if you listen to people working in other translation projects in other languages, that often just when the translators are getting to the finishing line, that's the time when there seems to be kind of intensified spiritual attack and things that happen that seem to slow the progress. Now, sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's just the realities of life, but it's really good to be praying for them, that they can just persevere through these last few months of tidying up the things that still need tidying up. And also they have to test the translation in the community one more time. They have to read the whole New Testament through with a group of different representatives from the community to get them to listen, see whether this is natural, and if there are any bits that are problematic, then they can do some last changes.
So when would you expect that this might be published? What kind of time frame we're looking in?
So at the moment it's planned that they're going to do their typesetting work in November. So the typesetting has to be done with a specialist typesetter who is a Cameroonian. He will have to come from Cameroon to work with them, and they'll probably work in Uganda rather than Congo, because the infrastructure is better there. So they've got to be ready for that for November, because that's it's been in the diary for a year now. And then once the typesetting will take about a month, and once that's done, then the New Testament gets sent to South Korea for publishing, and then it has to be shipped back from South Korea to Congo. So the community should receive their New Testaments and have a big celebration in July of 2021. That's what we're hoping and praying for and planning for now. But of course, with coronavirus, everything's more complicated, even more complicated than it normally is in Congo. Internationally, of course, there are things like the printing process. So those are all things to be praying about.
Brilliant. Wow. But you're also involved, I think, with the university, the BA in Bible translation at Shalom University. You're still involved in that too as well, aren't you?
Yes, that's right. So I've just got some more pictures. Okay, there's another one of the OMI. I'm just jumping to the pictures of the university. So this is the university, Shalom University in Bunia, which is the town just on the edge of Lake Albert, on the border between Uganda and Congo. And these are the students. There are 8 of them, plus the head of department in the stripy shirt, Kabichungu. And they are now coming towards the end of their second year of this new revamped degree program, and they are learning to translate the Bible into their languages. most of which don't yet have a New Testament. One of them hasn't. Judith, the woman, her language has the New Testament, but she's going to be involved in translating the Old Testament. So they're doing really well. They're at the moment they're working on Acts and learning to translate Acts and Revelation. But because of the lockdown, they've suspended classes from university for. I think that happened about the same time as the lockdown began here, although really coronavirus hasn't taken hold in DRC in the same way, thank God, because it's a very young, well, who knows why, but the population of Congo, like the population of a lot of African countries, is a very young population. Around half of the population are under 16. So perhaps that will be an advantage. In any case, I think they've only had about 60 deaths in DRC at the moment, and we pray that it doesn't take hold in the way it has here. But their lives have been disrupted a lot, and so the translation program has been disrupted. And the trouble with the lockdown in countries with poor infrastructure is that people can't really cope if they can't go to their fields and plant and harvest their crops, because that's how they survive. Or in the larger towns, the food chains become very disrupted, and of course we had panic buying here, but we got over that. But it's much more difficult in places where there isn't a big a secure food chain with lots of kind of stored food. So in a way, the lockdown creates these other problems that can become bigger than the problem of the virus itself. Of course, Congo is no stranger to viruses. So this is one of my students wearing a shirt about Ebola, Prévention Ebola. Je me lave les mains fréquemment au savon. It says, I frequently wash my hands with soap. And so they've actually been battling a virus for the last 2 years, Ebola, and thankfully it's almost been eradicated now. Not completely, but it's very much better than it was a year ago. So,
right. So how about Wycliffe's work more generally? How's it kind of progressing in this current context and in general?
So Wycliffe obviously has the same challenges as we all do, and because it's a very international organisation with workers all over the world. So members of British Wycliffe are in something like 70 countries, working in 360 languages. Then that means those who are working overseas at the moment, they are stuck overseas, they can't come home, but that's not necessarily a problem if they weren't planning to come home immediately. But things like travel for meetings, obviously not possible. But I think the challenges are just the same as they are for all of us. But then Wycliffe also is working a lot of places that are actually very inaccessible. So the OMI team are living in a remote area, but there are also a lot of places that are inaccessible in terms of the gospel, the community being, or the society being hostile to Christianity. And about 45% of Wycliffe's work now is in these what are called hard to reach places, where there's a lot of opposition, where they're having to work in secret, and translators' lives are in danger. So that continues. That's a different kind of inaccessibility and challenge. And I actually wanted to tell you about a story from Burkina Faso, which sorry, there's a very loud noise outside my window right now, but I don't know whether you can hear it. But I think it's the rubbish truck. So those of you who've known me for a long time know that when I first started with Wycliffe 27 years ago, I worked in Burkina Faso in West Africa. The arrow's pointing to Burkina there. And I was helping at the very beginning stages of Wycliffe's work. I was helping to write down a language called the Khan language in this in this community where the Christians were really facing a lot of opposition. There were just very few Christians, and the traditional culture has a royal family that was very opposed to Christianity because it saw Christianity as destroying the traditions of the ancestors that were kind of central to the royal family. And that tension has continued over the years. But in 2016, the New Testament was published in the Khan language with lots of joy. But recently, this tension between the traditionalists and the king, who represents the traditionalists, and the Christians has really flared up in a very dramatic way. And so the dispute is about how you bury members of the royal family who are Christians. There's all these traditional rites associated with burial if you're a member of the royal family in that culture, and some of those rites are associated with sacrifices to spirits and so on, and the Christians have rejected all of that, and they want to bury any royal Christian who's died in a Christian way. But the king, there was a Christian who died recently, and then the royal family went and dug her body up and reburied her according to the traditional rites. And then when the Christians complained about this to the authorities, they started, those associated with the royal family and a mob started burning down churches, smashed up the churches and burnt them. And the store of New Testaments was in one of the churches that was burnt down. So they've lost all the New Testaments that hadn't already been purchased, but also they've lost these church buildings, and they're very poor, and it takes them years to raise the money to build these simple church buildings. So now this is a big, there's an ongoing situation that the government authorities are involved in trying to resolve it, but the Christians feel very vulnerable. Some of them feel that their lives are under threat, one of the translators in particular. And they need wisdom to know how to respond. They think if the authorities clamp down too much on the royal family, it may actually lead to more backlashes against them and more burning of church property and so on. So it would be great if you could pray for them. So they're the Khan people, and I won't mention names because it might not be wise, but please pray for wisdom for them, in particular for this one translator who's kind of at the centre of things and feels under threat, and for God's protection and for reconciliation and a change of heart really on the part of the king. So that's just one example of some work in another part of the world.
Well, thank you. That really makes it real, doesn't it, to have that kind of story? Yeah.